All right. How are we all doing tonight?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure being back after a long absence. I assure you, Daedalus was not hiding me in the basement. I had some problems with my old laptop, and I had a big crash of my hard drive, and it was a very, very bad situation. Luckily, now it's been mostly rectified. All the data that I needed was already saved. So, yeah, it's just been a while waiting to get the laptop and then trying to schedule an episode. And the good thing is we have a good one, I think, today. A very poignant and sad one, but I think a necessary topic. And I will say, as a genocide scholar, if I was somewhat skeptical before I saw this Al Jazeera report, I'm no longer skeptical now that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. I believe that there's quite solid. Oh, go ahead.
Before we jump into that, I want to, first of all, yes, I am making him say that. It's definitely a thing I'm making Hetman do. But before we get into that, I kind of want to make a couple points. The first is there's a content warning up here for a reason, for the exact same reason that there was a content warning up for our coverage of the October 7th report from the UN Commission on Human Rights. This is going to be a difficult evening. I want to say that up front. I have notes. I set up notes. And I realized through the course of this hour and 21-minute thing that I basically had a note every at least 2 minutes about something that happened. We're not going to go through all of that. We're not going to show everything, but we might refer to certain points in this documentary that Al Jazeera has produced, and it could have some very disturbing material in it. So, heads up, everybody. For what it's worth, I regret that we haven't been around a little bit as much. I have been having a hard time, basically in existential despair over the bullshit I've been seeing this year in the election and overseas in Ukraine and Israel, which I know is kind of crappy. But the simple fact is it's kind of been difficult to summon the energy to, be educational, and I think Hetman would agree with me there.
Yeah, it's been very hard for me as well. Between everything that's going on in the world, especially with Ukraine, for me, it's been extra hard to unfortunately to do episodes, like this. I'm hoping we actually have we're in the talks of it, but we found another revisionist historian specifically a World War II revisionist historian, this British guy's channel. And we are going to hopefully pick apart his pro-Wehrmacht and Third Reich arguments. So that should be an interesting thing that we do, a little bit more fun. But I feel like that this, when this report came out, I saw it and I was actually it moved me quite a bit. And I sent it to Daedalus and I said, we really should cover this. And he agreed. So that's where we're at.
I think you and I have kind of been at odds about this past year.
Yeah. I mean, there's a part of me, when October 7th happened, I was very angry. And I've said this on this channel before. After I had about, I think, a good few months to process it, I was then able to really see what was, to look with impartial eyes to what was actually going on in Gaza. And one thing that makes it, this is an incredibly divisive topic. It's an incredibly contentious topic, and you don't really get a whole lot of information coming from Gaza itself. A lot of it you do, but the area is closed off to foreign journalists, and several journalists who do make it in there don't live very long. That's one thing that's really dirty about this particular war is actually the targeting of journalists and aid workers. It's absolutely disgusting to me, actually, that the IDF does stuff like this.
40. So actually, let's just jump into it. I have it 4150. Press fired on by sniper, and I was basically doing my notes, stream of consciousness, right, as I was watching it. Unclear if the vest is labeled with press. However, it is a blue non-camouflage vest, so it should provide no camouflage.
Respond to. Go ahead. But finish. I want to respond to
4155. Vest has press labeled in English. I spoke too soon. Like, that was very much something I noticed right away, because I was trying to look at this as a critical eye. Do I have concerns about Al Jazeera? Al Jazeera actually does a fairly good job reporting, all things considered. Probably a little bit better than most American news organizations, to be perfectly frank.
You definitely have a bias for sure, but I think that they've done a fairly good job at reporting. Well, there's only so many.
There is, for example,
there comes a point where like, to just be frank, where you can't really, when an atrocity gets so bad, it becomes almost impossible to cover up. And I don't think that they're really doing any work in inflating it. If anything, I think the number of people dead there is probably higher because there's so many people buried underneath the rubble. And yeah, I mean, I think that they've done a fairly good job of covering, like, of course that they've had their issues, but this report I think was very good.
The other thing I'd point out, and I encourage everyone to watch it, I have included in the description box the link to this video from Al Jazeera, along with the UN Human Rights Commission reports for October 7th and their report from October 7th till December 31st concerning Gaza, and I've included our coverage of the October 7th reports, in the interest of, in the interest of fairness. But this particular report uses a lot of expertise from RUSI and the King's College in London, which are British.
Which are reputable.
Yeah. this is like, if I go on to get a PhD, it'll be at King's College, because that's where you get war studies PhDs. That's the place to be as far as like advancing that particular aspect of a career. So this is this isn't a self-contained thing. There are Palestinian voices included in this quite extensively, but this has some pretty serious academic backing. Retired Army officers from the Royal Army and Human Rights Watch organization leadership. It's very well done, I think. And with that, I think we can probably move on to the first thing I think I want to talk about is the section where they talk about the 972 article, the plus 972 article on the use of AI for targeting. I don't know if you read that when I sent it to you.
No, I read that article. Yeah, I read it.
Let us play. I can make this work.
And 28.
And let me put this up for you so you. There we go.
An Israeli magazine later reveals artificial intelligence is being used to identify targets.
The Israeli army has marked tens of thousands of Gazans as suspects for assassination.
972 interviewed acting members of the military. The reason that AI was being used, basically, according to those Israeli sources, is that they wanted a tempo of attacks that was faster than could be humanly sustained.
I'm sorry?
Oh, is the sound on?
Are you watching the stream?
I am.
The sound is on.
Oh, yeah, I got it. Don't worry.
Okay.
How does the AI decide who is killable? It will look at everything that can be scraped about you, from surveillance, from spying, from your social media profile, from who your phone is near when you're walking around, who you're meeting, and they'll give you a number. And if your number out of 100 is above a certain threshold, then you can be attacked and killed.
So, in essence, here, I remember at least I covered this with the commander at the time. I don't know if you were available for that. I don't think you were.
Yeah, I don't think I was on that one.
A lot was made of the AI factor here and the use of machine learning to build those networks. And that's, I think, a thing to talk about for sure. But the other thing that this report illustrated was, and I recall quite clearly, is they got sources in Israeli intelligence to basically admit that they were not discriminating in how they attacked and targets that they were determining through this AI, that they were specifically trying to attack people in their homes and kill families. Just as readily.
It's part of a collective punishment.
Yes.
System.
Yes, just as readily as the AI is bad. And to be fair, I want to ask you, because do you think the engineers who designed this machine learning system could be considered culpable for genocide?
I think if they were to open, if they were to open a criminal case, if they were to against the state of Israel, against military leadership, they would probably. I think that there would be a strong, there probably would be a case opened up against the designers of the software. It's part of a sort of. It was used in legal parlance during the Bosnian War, but it's part of what you would call a joint criminal enterprise. So essentially, the designers of the AI how they basically crafted it, on, who to track, when to, attack. I think that, yeah, they would probably be part of the whole system. And I'm guessing they didn't outsource this. I'm guessing it's a Israeli company. I don't know too much about it, other than, the article you sent me, which I read a while ago now.
I actually have it saved. I have a giant folder I've been compiling, Israel Palestine. I don't think it says who. 30th. This. Checking real. Yeah, it's not saying, the article's not saying who developed the software. There is a link between Israel and our United States border control where we kind of share resources. So it could very well have been designed by an American firm as well. But this seems very specific to Israel's particular needs. So I might have been developed in-house. It's hard to say.
It also could have been, designed to their specifications, all of that.
Yes, by another company.
Yeah. I think a criminal case, actually, to be honest, I think it might even be more likely, depending if this is a foreign company or not, foreign away from Israel, it might be more likely that a case is opened against them. Because,
well,
especially if they're, yeah.
To be fair, it's probably a good chance that a case will be opened against Israel and Israeli leaders. Just won't go anywhere because they will just sit in Israel and never come out again.
Yeah.
Or to countries that won't honor the criminal court's arrest warrants, like the United States.
Yeah.
That I think could be a significant issue down the line. Like I have a feeling that there's not going to be any significant justice done here at all.
Which is honestly, it's really only recently in, the history of genocide where you have, convictions. The vast majority of people involved in it, even leadership, like, they never get tried or sentenced for it. Some of them do, but they go years, decades before actually something is done. Like, for example, General Rios Montt of Guatemala, I think he was in government, he after committing genocide against the Mayan hill tribes in Guatemala. He went years before, a case was opened against him, and he was actually put on trial in Guatemala itself, and he died while the trial, I believe, was still going on. I'm pretty sure that happened. I might be mistaken. With Rwanda, you have widespread, prosecution of perpetrators of the crime, even low-level ones.
But that was done internally by the new Rwandan government, wasn't it?
Of course, yeah. And same thing happened in Guatemala too. With Serbia and Bosnia, like the Bosnian Serb army, and I believe with Slobodan Milosevic, Slobodan was handed over, extradited by the Serbian government. With other criminal, like I believe with the former Yugoslav states, maybe they were signatories of the of the international criminal court system, but there were obviously prosecutions of perpetrators there, with Cambodia as well, with the Khmer Rouge.
Yeah.
And a lot of these are still ongoing, by the way.
Yeah,
it's a years long process.
It can actually stretch into decades.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yes.
And that's the thing too, is whether or not, because it does stretch into decades, and we have examples of people who were perpetrators in the Holocaust. Usually they were part of like auxiliary groups, not Germans themselves, but there's trials that have gone on, like even 10 years ago, with Ivan Demyanjuk, for example, who was a guard, Ukrainian guard at Sobibor, I believe.
Yes.
And yeah, it kind of brings up the question, genocide, to me, there should be no statute of limitations on it. The interesting thing, though, is that a lot of the sentences given in the International Criminal Court for genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, the sentences, they're not always like life sentences. They can be actually quite light compared to what is given to people in the U.S. criminal justice system.
Well,
it often,
that's, I think, a flaw in the American criminal justice system more than anything.
Yeah, it says a lot about our system.
Yes.
But I always thought, like someone in, like, say, like a place like Texas, who in a fit of rage murders someone and gets the lethal injection, versus a person who might have commanded a battalion or a regiment that was responsible for destroying a village. I mean, this person who destroys the village gets maybe
you feel
40
like
years.
That person should be kept under lock and key forever, and it just isn't the thing that happens.
It isn't the case. Yeah.
Well, while we're at that particular point, I don't want to put this up on screen for fairly obvious reasons, but at around 2240, they show a number of video clips of the IDF taking in detainees, or in American military parlance, enemy prisoners of war. And these people have been stripped down to their underwear, and I can't stress enough how much of a war crime that is. When American soldiers are trained to take prisoners when they're performing actions on the objective after an attack, you have basically it's a two-person job, right? One soldier covers the other while they get down and they check the potential prisoner for booby traps. This practice that the Israeli army is engaged in is not normal. Like, it's designed to be humiliating, rather than militarily useful.
Without a doubt, there's a it's intended to humiliate the victims. And even in the case of Ukraine, when I see Russians taking Ukrainian prisoners, notwithstanding the fact of the numerous crimes they've committed against Ukrainian prisoners of war, which we're hearing more and more, and there was just recently a pretty big execution of about 20. But I can't say that I've seen them stripping them down to their underwear or naked. But I see large groups of, usually, and it's not clear at all. That's something that must be said. It's not clear at all that these are combatants.
Well,
they're usually military age men.
Not always, though. Here's the thing. We haven't gone over the UN Human Rights Commission report on the war crimes committed in Gaza because it's long and I haven't figured out how to make that digestible. But it very clearly states that Israeli soldiers are also having women strip and children strip as well. and that there is evidence that this is a mass practice being performed throughout Gaza. So it's
particularly designed to, because in Islamic culture, it's a particularly nakedness, being naked in front of someone other than your spouse is a very humiliating thing.
Well, I think it's typically being stripped naked is humiliating in any context. That's why it's prescribed as a violation of humanitarian law. Yes, it is particularly to Islamic culture a particular thing. I think this also goes hand in hand with the remarkable nature of this is that these are not being filmed chiefly by reporters. This is the IDF filming these events and brazenly putting them up for the world to see. Like, they have no sense of hiding their crimes. They're openly committing them. And on a related note, and they did talk about it, there is the practice of IDF soldiers rooting through the panty drawers of Gazans, and, I don't get this. It's the weirdest goddamn thing I've seen. They keep posting videos of them dressed up in people's lingerie. Like, it's bizarrely disturbing, I think, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, it is.
And that goes into, I will move on to another clip here real quick. 25-ish minutes.
These videos don't show a professional army. They show an army, but at times appears to almost completely lack any self-discipline, to a point where one thinks it's not just personal lack of discipline, it's an institutional lack of discipline.
So, that is a retired general of the Royal Army saying what I've been saying for months, that the Israeli army doesn't appear to be a military organization. It's just a gang of thugs. It is, and I think prior to that, we saw a couple seconds of it. They are doing a very effective job here in this documentary of identifying those soldiers involved so that they might be questioned later. I think you commented on that prior to this too, as well.
Yeah.
But this is a problem. I think one of the key indicators in the study of military history for a force that's going to commit a lot of war crimes is this lack of discipline and professionalism. Like, this is kind of where you find that a lot.
Honestly, so I take issue with that. The Israeli army, for example, could go through, say in Lebanon, for example, if they're going through a Maronite Christian area, so an area that's relatively friendly to them, and I could be wrong, but my prediction is that they would behave in a much different way. So the Wehrmacht, for example, it's a very strictly disciplined military. There's no question about that.
Hang on.
Yet it really depends on where they're at.
Yes, I was about to say
where you see this, and this is the thing is what this suggests. It's not necessarily that the IDF has little discipline. They just don't. They have discipline. They just don't enforce it within Gaza, which suggests that there's that's what you see with an army that's likely going to commit crimes. It's an indicator that
but that is
Israeli society and the military itself has a real hatred of the people there. And that is why they're not enforcing the discipline that they would usually have.
Well, that's a problem,
anywhere
though.
else.
Like, discipline is kind of binary. You either enforce it or you don't.
Yeah.
If you're not enforcing discipline, it's not there. And what I'd say about the Wehrmacht is,
well, but that's what I'm going to say. Like, for example,
you're going to find wildly different discipline between discipline standards between frontline combat units in World War II and rear echelon units, particularly those echelon units that are performing the atrocities that you, for example, you covered in your master's paper on Ukraine. Those are significantly less disciplined units.
They are, but at the same time, those same rear, rear area divisions, for example, they're not just present within, occupied Soviet territory. They're present in France. They're present in, the Low Countries. They're present everywhere where there are German units, where they have a military occupation or a civil occupation. They're there. And if you were to see, for example, the behavior of certain German units in, say, Belarus or Ukraine, in France, for example, in like maybe 1941, 42, the individuals responsible for that would be put on, they would be put under court-martial. They would not, get away with anything remotely like that. You only start to see that in, say in France, for example, towards the, 1944, towards the end of the occupation in that area, where you have very heavy resistance, and you also have some units, particularly SS units, being moved from the Eastern Front there, and they bring with them their style of anti-partisan warfare, which is basically the war of extermination. So you start to see some burned villages and collective shooting of French civilians, but in general you don't see that. So my argument is that we wouldn't likely, and again, this could be wrong, but we probably wouldn't see this if they are in an area where they know the people are friendly. With Russian units now in Ukraine, or actually, to be honest, with we can go back even to sort of this Soviet army. It really didn't matter who was there. I know of reports when the Soviet army came back to Ukraine, so technically their own territory, of them stealing, looting from civilians, requisitioning without any discourse. And you got to remember too that these people have very little. It doesn't take much for them to starve. So taking, for example, someone's apiary, like their beehive, that's what they basically use to generate income. So you're going to put that whole family in danger. I'm not sure if we'd see that with the Israeli army. I think that they're, but that's compared. That's a pretty low bar.
We do see that, though, rather extensively throughout this documentary, that they engage in the wholesale destruction of civilian property without military necessity behind it. Like it's very,
of course, yeah. But they're doing that in an area where none of them, and I would say the vast majority, not every Israeli soldier, but the good percentage of them view these people as bringing it on themselves, as basically non-human to a large degree. They've already dehumanized them, and that's what enables them to do all this. And actually, the fact that discipline isn't happening shows that it's a systemic issue, right? Like it's a systemic issue within that area. They're not doing what they would usually. They're operating outside of their normal their normal.
I don't know if we can say that though, ultimately, because this is the Israeli normal for their army for the last 30 years. This is like the extent, by and large, the extent of their operations has been in the West Bank, Gaza, and Lebanon, where they have by and large behaved in the same way.
It's true, yeah.
I don't think you can say that's not their normal. Like at this point, that is the
that's their normal
expectation.
when it comes to the Palestinian population.
But we'd have
to see how it's going to be somewhere else.
I don't think they're going to get that far into Lebanon. To be frank, they're struggling. They are struggling right now in Lebanon. I don't think they're going to get that far to actually be able to produce that kind of information. If you follow
the military situation, I haven't really kept track.
I have. They are taking seen casualties for what's supposed to be little contact. Like a few days ago, it was something on the order of 60 wounded and 7 or 8 dead for just running into a squad of Hezbollah fighters. That reported a single squad. That's 2 platoons of casualties that got their teeth kicked in. Like that's not nothing. Like that would be very concerning to me as a line commander.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I'd be like, oh, these are supposedly elite special forces too. Like that's even worse. I don't think they're going to get that far. Like they're going to bog down in southern Lebanon and be stuck there for a while. Kind of like they're stuck in Gaza without any clear military objective. I want to do this part here too. Hang on. Too far. This isn't the one, but that is just an Israeli. I don't want to do that.
Abuse.
انه البنادق في المجاوره يعني طبعا احنا ما كان باستطاعنا انه البنادق على رؤوسنا نستطيع نعمل اي حركه يعني هو حكى لابني انه احنا يعني فيش حاجه بتمنعنا عن قتلكم احنا ممكن نقتلكم كلكم عادي يعني ما حدا حيردعنا ولا حدا.
No one would stop us and no one would call us to account. I think that speaks volumes about what's happening in Gaza. That sentence alone kind of speaks volumes about the situation here. And like this gentleman, they interview a number of times throughout the course of the documentary, and they very much bury the lead. But another thing they have done that's absolutely beyond the pale of what happened is this man reports that he was put under observation by an Israeli machine gunner and sent into sent into surrounding buildings to check for fighters and booby traps. They used him quite literally as a human shield.
Human shield, yeah.
And this is something we should probably spend a little time on because it is a often repeated topic in this discourse about human shielding. To be clear, using human shields is a war crime, but that doesn't mean that you are standing in the general vicinity of someone. It means that you have taken them, you are either by threat or by force holding them in front of you to try to stop a retaliatory attacks. It is
another example of it too, for example, would be using civilians to clear a minefield.
Yes,
that's another example of human shields. That's something that I've seen done, for example. That was done by the Wehrmacht a few times, actually, in Ukraine. There's a memorial in the former city of Popasna that the Russians destroyed now. It's kind of sad, but there's a memorial they used, I think, 40 children to clear a minefield for them.
Yeah,
so
this is
stuff
actually
like that.
This actually goes back to some of the discussion that was happening around the pager incident a couple weeks ago. Because the section of international law that covers minefields also covers booby traps. This is just the level of barbarity. Let's move on a second. I wanna put this up. I'm gonna put this up. I'm gonna forewarn everyone before I do this that this is disturbing. 32 23. This is a Palestinian who has had a Star of David carved into their back. I can't. This is barbarism, to be put bluntly.
This is something that I saw when there's a famous photo. It was actually taken by a friend of mine, a Ukrainian photojournalist, Zoya Shu. But I think it was in like 2015, the DNR forces captured a Ukrainian soldier and they carved a swastika on his back. Yeah, this is no different. It's very similar.
Incredibly barbaric, to be perfect. Like, what purpose would this serve? This is why okay. This is why I've been frustrated, because things like this are happening, and you have an entire set of dialogue that's totally trying to argue that it's not.
Yeah, there comes a point where, you know, and that's why I really have a lot of respect for scholars like Omer Bartov, who is Israeli, and, you know, he is first and foremost a genocide scholar before he's an Israeli. You know, that's his you know, and he's a great scholar at that, and he is, from the beginning, he's been, you know, kind of, you know, sounding the alarm about this, and now he's convinced that, you know, genocide is occurring in Gaza, and you know, that's kind of where I'm at too. It's not that, you know, you have personal feelings, you have, you know, whatever you might have as a Jewish person, or, you know, someone who even sympathizes with Israel, but then there's just the hard truth of what's going on. And you know, I think, and I got to be clear here too. Genocide is definitely going to be, you know, it's something that has to be go through. There has to be a court process for something, you know, to officially have that, you know, label. But I think that there's a very strong case for it, all the way down, you know. And one thing that has made it so easy, I think, for this, if anyone is ever prosecuted for it, and that's a big if, but they've made it very easy. Not only with the footage that they've taken, but with they've done something that not even, honestly, not even like, you know, the Bosnian Serb army did, not even that Hitler himself did, but, you know, they're making pretty open statements, high level military people, high level politicians.
Yes.
Even the president.
I think
the prime minister, I meant.
No, the president of Israel has too, to be frank.
Yeah.
I think there's a line at the beginning of the documentary, or near the beginning of the documentary, where they call this the first live streamed genocide.
Yeah.
That I think is incredibly apt for what's going on here.
It's also one thing that I've noticed too is, and that's like, you know, what's going to be determined, I guess, you know, once more footage comes out. But this is a genocide a lot that I've seen. The one kind of different factor that I've seen with it is a lot of it's being done, you know, by the Air Force, by bombs. You know,
there is, and I need to look into this a little bit more, because I don't necessarily check the tonnage of explosives being used in a particular conflict. there has been a couple people who have tried to note to me that 2,000-pound bombs, the Mark 84 bombs that we have provided to Israel, are not commonly used by America. We have them in our inventory, but we tend to use smaller warheads. I have to look at that.
To avoid collateral, right?
Yeah, so and I've talked about it with Commander McMillan, the process used in authorizing strikes and the modeling used to try to predict collateral damage and mitigate it. We've talked about a little bit about that. So I have to check on that particular claim in full, because I'm not entirely we have a lot of things that kind of sit in storage and don't get used, obviously, because we keep shipping them out to people. But like 2,000-pound bombs are it's difficult to track their usage, right? So I have to look into that. That'll take a little bit. But there is. Let's move on a little bit here too, because I think this is very worth looking.
Often set to music. The destruction of buildings is regularly featured, often set to music.
You see huge blocks getting blown up, universities getting blown up.
It's just extraordinary. This is willful destruction.
First of all, destroying buildings without military cause is a war crime. Flat out. No equivocation. The targeting of universities in particular, I find kind of heinous in the extreme. This is not necessarily the oldest cities on Earth, but Gaza City and the surrounding areas are ancient human settlements. These are old universities, like they've been around for a long time. This is an act of cultural erasure. Did I lose you? Are you dead?
I am not dead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, this is an act of cultural erasure. It's not militarily necessary. Like, let us assume for a moment that there are tunnel access points in a building. I can, in fact, take out the tunnel access point without necessarily destroying the building. This is a thing that is possible. And it would be a thing that's normally practiced to avoid having excess destruction to civilian property. Later on in the documentary, they detail, actually not that far off, they detail how the Israeli military engineers just leveled an entire village for fun.
Israeli kibbutz near Oz, which was attacked on October 7th.
לנו משימה, גדחן קומנדו, פלוגה ג', לכו תחריבו את כפר המחבלים, חירבת אחזה, שמשם יצאו לניר עוז, לחטוף, לרצוח, לענות.
First of all, putting a limpet mine up in place of a clock is just fucking excessive.
אנחנו בשמחה בשם עם ישראל, להשמיד את הכפר של הנאצים מחשיבם, ועבדנו שבועיים, עבדנו קשה, קיצצנו שם את כל הכפר, עמדנו במשימה.
At the end of the operation in Kirbet Kazar, soldiers post before and after shots.
Yes. Sorry, on boop.
In Kirbet Kazar.
What kind of, you know, and that's like that, the amount of resources spent on doing that.
Well, just
the time.
Yes. Have you considered that the buildings are Hamas? Well, even more than that, the fact that they're able to do this with impunity means that the buildings are not a military threat. The other thing I would note, they talk later on near the end of the documentary, medical equipment has been destroyed to render hospitals useless. This is again a problem because, like, for example, they tried to make the argument about the strongholds under the Al Nazir hospital. Every single hospital in Gaza has been hit. Every single one has suffered damage. They've just wantonly destroyed these hospitals in order to render them less able to give aid to the Palestinians. This is beyond the pale, I think. And there is the Go ahead.
whole mission of this campaign. Here is my theory behind it. So what they're trying to do, and it's the thing that I've noticed, I've been watching a lot of just recently, like, some people who have they're interviewing children there, adults, and more you're seeing people just wanting this to end there. There's no, like, what they're trying to do is basically, and this has always been a problematic, not problematic, is it's actually too soft of a word to say, but you can kind of compare it to the same sort of mission that, or operational goal that the Japanese had with the city of Nanking. They're trying to basically break the will of the population to resist. They're trying to make it so difficult for them that they will never, they'll just want it to end. They just want it to end. And in some ways, they're succeeding in doing that. A lot of people are talking about how this will just breed more and more, hatred. But I think it's beyond that. They're trying to make it so terrible for them that it erases their will to fight, any longer. And so that's one reason why this has been exceedingly brutal. Another, perhaps more sinister reason is they want to prevent Gaza from ever being used as a launching point for attacks against Israel again. And by the only way to really do that is you have to basically destroy it and occupy it. So, that's what I think that their goal is, treating the population as, like, putting them under the most sort of brutal conditions. This is beyond, honestly, it's beyond the great catastrophe, the Al-Nakba or whatever, the massive ethnic cleansing that was committed, after the 1948 war.
Well, let's
it's beyond the scope of almost anything that they've been through as a people. It's and I think that's the goal.
Let's contextualize this a little bit, because I think there's a fundamental flaw that I think Israel is aware of. Here, Gaza is not responsive. The Hamas is not responsive to the needs of Gazans. I know this.
Yeah.
And Israel knows this, and Israel is very specific about this. That is why Hamas is in power in Gaza, because it is not responsive to the needs of Palestinians. So I've actually been putting this together while I've been working on the Camp David stuff. 1992, we have the Madrid conference, and the PLO is given observer status. They're not allowed to actually participate in negotiations. A number of prominent Palestinians who are moderates, who are not connected with any terrorist movement, are put forward to negotiate. And they bring a set of demands to Israel and the United States. to start the negotiations, and these include the cessation of all building of the settlements and a baseline commitment to the 1967 lines of resolution from UN Resolution 242. Israel outright rejects this, and they choose instead to negotiate with Yasser Arafat and the PLO. This is what results in the Oslo Accords, Oslo 1 and 2. They take the PLO because the PLO is willing to undermine that negotiating position of cessation of settlement, etc. And they elevate the PLO in order to allow themselves to continue the settlements in the West Bank and at that time Gaza. Then in turn, they try to use the PLO to undermine Hamas, and Hamas to in turn undermine the PLO. They play both groups off of one another to try to make disempower both groups. And it ends up being that neither the Palestinian Authority or Hamas is effective in representing the Palestinian people for this reason. And then they have turned around after their withdrawal from Gaza and deliberately had the Hamas propped up so they can offer an answer to Fatwa and the PLO. At every single stage, Israel has cynically exploited the internal divisions of the Palestinian people in order to continue this movement towards cleansing the Palestinians from the lands they want to settle. There has been a lot of people talking about what has been happening here, and they've been making comparisons to historical events. And I'll be honest, I can certainly understand, even if I don't agree with and frankly disavow, people comparing this to the Holocaust. But what it actually is a lot more similar to how we have dealt with our indigenous people, both here in the United States
I was going to say,
and in Canada.
It's similar.
This kind of playing off of internal divisions, double backdoor dealing, and secret negotiations designed to screw people over. That is a hallmark of what was done, at least a part of what was done here in the United States and in Canada. And obviously you have things like residential schools and whatnot that also compound that horror. But like this is a slow burning ethnic cleansing that in the past year has been kicked into overdrive.
Of course. Yeah, I think that's a very apt comparison.
And there is a set of problems, I think, with the way this is talked about, because people they keep repeating that nonsense about this being a acceptable casualty rate or a common casualty rate for urban warfare, which John Spencer should be pilloried for, to be frank. But like, we have a basic inability to talk about this effectively in the United States because anyone who tries to is labeled as anti-Semitic. And that's bad.
I think too, a lot of the
that's bad because it obscures actual anti-Semitism, and it cheapens it, and it makes it much harder to protect Jews generally.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I also think, though, that a lot of the people protesting the war aren't that well informed about it. A lot of the college students, they just kind of like, pick an issue.
Maybe not. But here's the thing about that. There might be 50 or let's say you have 50 or 60 people protesting, and one of them says something anti-Semitic. That person is wrong. That person who said the anti-Semitic thing. But the effort is being made to label all those 50 or 60 people based on the actions of the one. And that is problematic on a lot of levels. And I've been accused of being anti-Semitic for that as well. A couple people. I've had a good year too, by the way. It's been fun. Anyway, the problem with that is that we have, and it's the same basic problem that we encounter as we put together and we kind of administer our communities, is we have a bunch of people with diverse views, and I am loath to have a situation where we exile people for bad views, and at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is tarred with that person's bad views. So, like, that kind of argumentation, I feel, is incredibly dishonest and disingenuous with the people who do it. And it's being very commonly done by a lot of Americans who aren't Jewish, but are using this issue to try to bolster their credentials as political commentators, to be frank. And I think that is almost as anti-Semitic as the people in the crowd saying anti-Semitic things. Because you're just tokenizing Jews and using their plight for your own gain. Yeah, Jewish people have been called anti-Semitic for being against the actions of.
Yeah, I think that the most credible people on the anti-war, anti to even use the term anti-Zionist, but like the ones that have been the most kind of credible voices are actually the former IDF soldiers kind of coming out against all this. They've been.
I want to direct particular attention to our friends at In Time Independent News, who just last week had an interview with a former IDF soldier. It was actually excellent.
Did too. It was very good.
I have to talk to Nick about letting us steal that for certain things. Fine with it. I just want to check with him first because, you know, we're friends. So like, but no, that is, I think, if you didn't watch it, and I know I threw it up in the cathedral for everyone to see, go watch that, because it was like, this young man was angry, and to be fair, he has a right to be, because this is being perpetrated in his name and he doesn't agree with it. But there's more to it, and this is a conversation you and I and a guest will be having in more detail as soon as he recovers from the Florida hurricane, Milton. There is a culpability that we share here in the United States for this, being a weapons supplier to Israel and an enabler to it. And there's a culpability that we share because our government is doing this in our name and against my will. So I am perhaps not necessarily as culpable as the people doing the thing, but there is a level of culpability that is almost inescapable for an American citizen, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make this about me or about us or about the people who are not there, but
it's not.
It is to a certain extent. We live in an age where we can see these things happening in virtual real time. There's not much delay, and there hasn't been much delay. Like, we watched the crisis in Rwanda. As Americans, we watched the crisis of Rwanda unfold and did nothing. There isn't really a place that you can stick your head in the sand and credibly say, like, a lot of German citizens post-Holocaust said we didn't know. And for what it's worth, that might have been the case. They might not have known. That's not possible today. It's not possible to say that you did not know.
Yeah, of course.
And I resent the people who try to tell me not to speak out about this, or to try to imply that I'm just doing this because I'm a bigot. I mean, you have been one of my closest friends for 2 decades. I feel like if I was a bigot, you would have known. So, like, I resent that.
Yeah.
It's
You're cutting off a little bit, by the way.
I'm sorry.
I have to let you know.
I'm eating my microphone now again. I can't abide by those people. The other thing, like, there might be direct culpability for the United Kingdom as well, too. They talk about the RAF doing overflights for the IDF and possibly providing targeting data out of their bases in Cyprus.
the real bad thing about this too is it there's not really the politicians, you know, in the United States who are kind of speaking against this, they're being labeled as anti-Semites. I mean, even like Bernie Sanders, who's
Jewish,
you know, Jewish, yeah, is you know, labeled as an enemy of Israel and, you know, anti-Semitic. I mean, you can't really speak against it, and it doesn't really matter what it's bipartisan, right? It's no matter what party you're a part of, you know, and that's the interesting thing, because I'm not exactly sure what.
this is the one.
It's really hard for me to say this honestly, because you know I'm of Jewish heritage through my mother. I have family members who went from Ukraine and were among the first sort of settlers. They were part of the left-wing Zionist group, Polazion, and you know, formed sort of, you know, collective farms and sort of their own sort of guard units there.
A kibbutz.
Kibbutzim, yeah. It's interesting. I don't know that much about it. I just have heard that part about that side of the family. But that's like, you know, it makes them among kind of the founders or founding fathers of Israel. A lot of the founding fathers or, you know, leaders of Israel are from Ukraine, by the way, in other parts of the Russian imperial space. But yeah, it's hard because on one end, you know, you want to, you know, it's not that I don't believe that Israel should exist. I think that, you know, it's good that there is a Jewish homeland, you know, and a place for people to go. But at the same time, you know, how can you? There's no way to justify what they're doing, and this conflict should have ended years and years ago.
So let me do my thing here, and you can hate me afterwards. I think there is something uniquely problematic about how we talk about Zionism. And I saw this happening today on Twitter, even, where people are like, well, there are some people who have a definition of Zionism that's just the right of Jewish people to exist in Lebanon. Like, well, that's cute that you have your own personal definition. But here is the particular problem. Zionism, by its very nature, necessitated the destruction of the people living there in order to take their land. There is no liberal Zionism is something you tell yourself to make yourself feel better. And you can tell this because there's never any attempt to forge the mandate into a joint government between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
You need to read a little bit more about the history of Zionism, the different factions within it. I would strongly encourage you to do that, because no, there were those discussions of joint rule over the land. There were groups advocating for that. There were also right-wing groups too, that were, you know, for example,
but that's not what was executed.
It's not what was executed, but, you know, his history, the events that unfolded, and you also cannot discount too the, you know, the actions of the Arabs living in that in that territory. You cannot discount their actions. This didn't happen in a vacuum. You know, there was violence that they committed against Jewish settlers too.
Sure.
Early on. So I mean, this is a very complex. It's a very it's a very complex topic. Honestly,
again,
it's a topic that I don't even.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we know what happens. The concept of the replacement is built into the practice, particularly the practice of those Zionists who were in communication with the British government. This is their end game, their goal, and what they're describing. So, like, those discussions might have taken place, but that was never the policies that were being implemented. Like it's kind of like when
Thank
someone
you
goes,
is it was not a monolith. You're treating it as such. You need to actually read you need to that is something I'm encouraging you to do, and it's something that I need to do too, because quite honestly, I know I would say I know a little bit more about this than you, but only a little bit. I mean, in terms of you gotta
well, what you're talking about is a concept of academic debate, and I'm talking about an extant set of policies.
correct.
Yeah,
but there's a reason. But
this
those
is like the same
policies,
thing as trying to
so
argue.
for example, what you need to learn is why the right wing group succeeded and outmaneuvered, for example, your left wing groups. Why did that happen? How did it happen? That's something that I could definitely learn more about. This is definitely a topic that is it's outside of my wheelhouse. I think I've been wanting to learn more about it, but I've almost been, deliberately avoiding it, because it's so.
But that's the problem
contentious.
of trying to argue that the Soviet Union doesn't represent communism. Well, okay, it doesn't represent the intellectual framework of communism, but it does represent a thing that happened. Like, it's kind of hard to turn away from that.
I agree with you in that basic fact, but yeah, I think both of us need to do some reading on it, and then come back to the question of it. We can start by, we have to look at, the various different factions, thinkers of it, and it goes back, quite a bit into the 19th century.
Well, I think functionally, though, you really have to look at it from the establishment of the British Mandate in 1917, because that's kind of when all this goes down and actually happens. So here's the thing. I'm not trying to advocate for a destruction of Israelis. They should be able to live in peace. And like any peace deal is going to have to be based off of the 1976 orders. But the fundamentals at play from 1917 till around 1948 are about the expulsion of the people who were living on the land. It is a recognized conflict. It's what fuels the Palestinian conflict uprising in 1936, is their inability to get any traction with a political representation in the system, because they were being forced out and being sidelined and marginalized. It's very much informs the conflicts that happen. I think I sent you the recommendation for Rashid Khalidi's book, The 100 Years' War on Palestine.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I want
to. I am notating it now as we speak again, because I'm rereading it while I'm working on writing things. But he makes it incredibly clear that the efforts that the Palestinians went through that were rebuffed to peacefully negotiate a settlement. There doesn't seem to have been any room for that at all in the actual execution of the mandate. So it's
just looking at.
It's fine to say that some people had different ideas, but those ideas were not what was executed upon.
No, they're not what was implemented at all. But I'd like to understand how it happened, why things happened the way that they did, and that's kind of why I want to educate myself more on the topic.
With that, where are we? Oh yeah, we're approaching cutoff time. I want to go over this part too in the stream.
في المقاومة خارج البيت، يعني خلف المنزل. فأخذونا إحنا رجال وحطونا عند الشرفة، وكانوا حاطين الأسلحة تاعتهم فوق روسنا ويطلقوا رصاص على الجهة الأخرى للشباب، وإحنا كنا مثل سواتر أو دروع بشرية. إنه شافوني بتكلم لغة إنجليزية، قال لي بدك تطلع. هو كان الرشاش من البلكونة شايفني، وقال لي أي حركة منك يعني بتروح أو بتتحرك أنا حأطلق رصاص عليك. فاضطريت إنه أدخل في أماكن حفر وأماكن كذا، وأقول له إنه ما فيش أحد وأرجع تاني. فطلب مني إنه أدخل بيوت المنطقة كلها.
This description fits with evidence obtained by Al Jazeera. A civilian is ordered to inspect empty buildings while monitored by 2 drones.
I'd note that that man is limping.
In this case, 2 civilians
خدونا على شحن، شبحونا خارج الشحن مش داخله بالشكل هذا، في ايدي واحده ربطني مربط بلاستيك من ايدي اليمين وربطني خارج الشحن، وانا مجرد من كامل ملابسي، كانت الدنيا مطر.
Footage from the occupied West Bank supports this account. This photograph is taken by an Israeli soldier in Gaza City. The I unit has spoken to 6 individuals who say they were used as human shields.
Since the beginning of this ground invasion, we have documented dozens of cases where civilians were actually used as human shields by the Israeli army, forcing them to enter combat zones or enter places or enter buildings that they think are, for example, booby-trapped, or where they think that there might be armed members of Palestinian factions inside one area or another. And this is being used on a daily basis.
Where you see it cropping up on a continuous, widespread basis, then investigators and prosecutors will look high up to see if that is being countenanced, if it's either coming down as a direct direction from those above, or they're turning a blind eye. And in both of those cases, it can incur command responsibility for those in the chain of command.
That's kind of going to be about the end of what we have time for. We got a little time to talk about this because I know you got to get out of here.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I talk a lot about is when we started doing in Army ROTC civilians in the battlefield training. And one of the things you are taught is that you are incredibly vulnerable when you are making contact with civilian, one of reality that you don't know and are trying to get to know and, you know, build a relationship with, because part of COIN is kind of building those relationships so that you can get intelligence and whatnot down the line. So American soldiers are trained not even to have their hands on the near the trigger well of their weapon when doing this. So you walk out by yourself, the rest of your unit is behind, and they're not even really aiming to cover you. You're going to have, if something goes wrong, a couple seconds where you're in deep shit.
Yeah.
Because everyone is trying to appear non-threatening. Or as non-threatening as a bunch of jackasses with assault rifles can possibly be. So, they just don't care. They're just perfectly happy to expend the Palestinians as resources. And you talked a little bit before about you thinking this being unique to the Palestinians. I don't know if that's true. You have widespread reports of the use of the Hannibal Directive, for example, on October 7th, where Israeli troops fired on their own people in order to try to prevent their capture. You have Netanyahu repeatedly refusing to negotiate for the release of hostages. At this point, without much evidence otherwise that may come up later, but it does not seem that the current Israeli government and the IDF place any significant value on anyone's human life. That they seem to value a concept of the body politic above the individual lives of the individuals who make up that politic.
You're cutting off.
I stopped talking.
Okay.
Yeah. It just doesn't seem like they don't seem to care any more than Hamas cares.
Yeah. I mean, I can't really argue that. You know, what is the Hannibal Directive? I know I saw some documentary on it. It's essentially to, like, what is it?
The Hannibal Directive is one of those Israeli military doctrines that they've supposedly stopped using. It is a program by which, if they call this out, then they basically turn areas that they are defending into free fire zones. So, for example, Hamas and the various armed militant groups on October 7th, which you and I covered in the UN report, go out and they capture hostages. They throw them on trucks and they drive them back into Gaza. The Hannibal Directive encourages Israeli units to fire on those trucks in order to try to prevent people from being taken hostage.
Interesting. It's pretty barbaric.
It is extremely barbaric. Like this entire, it kind of belies like the Israeli dialogue around human shields, because it's very clear that human life doesn't matter enough to Israelis to really make human shielding a viable tactic. Because they just use it as an excuse to kill people. It's just used as a rank justification. And here's the thing, like I wanna stress this is important because we've talked a lot about this stuff like this in the last year, and we're coming up on the second anniversary of the channel. We spent a lot of time talking about this. This isn't unique. This isn't something special that Israelis do.
No.
It's something we've seen. It's something we've seen Azerbaijan when we talked about the situation in Azerbaijan and the potential for a war with Armenia. We've talked about it with Ukraine. This is not something unique. The reason I have treated it like I have for the past year is because we have so many people trying to tell us that it isn't happening and that to call it out is unique.
Yeah. No,
it's not. I can't stress this enough. This is a society that is sick, which means it can be cured. It is not a problem of racism, insofar as that it's something that is incalculably or inexorably tied to being Jewish. This is a problem when a society is so fueled by hatred that they can no longer make moral choices. It's not unique. We've seen it. We saw it in World War II, in particular with Japan, and how they treated occupied territories as well. It's not something special or unique, and I want to make that clear. To be cliche about it, like there are plenty of Jewish people who oppose this. It's not. I don't want someone to take that to be the takeaway.
Yeah, and it's there are Israelis that do too. There's quite a bit, including among the people whose family members are being held hostage. A lot of them are very angry about what is, how the government has handled this. They're furious, actually. But yeah, I mean, it's a society that has become sick. It's a segment of it, I think, has been sick for a long time, but October 7th was the impetus, I think, for that to happen. And that's another thing that I want to bring up, and it might be a little bit controversial, but my first thoughts when this happened were like, how does a nation with such a good intelligence, like such a robust and intelligence network, I mean, they're good, they're what the FSB and Garou wish they were. There's no. That's why I think that this was October 7th. I'm not saying it's an inside job. It's not, but I believe that somewhere along the ways, this was not. It was preventable, and they did nothing to prevent it. And I think that it gave them it's sort of the casus belli or whatever.
Well,
to
I think the comparison to the FSB is apt. I think there was a time when Mossad was actually, as far as intelligence agencies go, incredibly effective at being able to get out in front of these things. I'm not sure that's the case anymore. I also know, because we had discussions about it early on, that significant IDF presence that was basically meant to contain Gaza was reassigned to the West Bank. There was a attitude, like, I don't think it was an inside job, but I think there was an attitude amongst the Israeli government and the IDF high command of complacency. And
you believe that basically what they've said, that they didn't believe that Hamas had this capability, and they believed that they could contain it, and they were more worried about, for example, Hezbollah launching an attack like this.
Yeah,
that's what I've heard.
The fundamental argument that I saw made,
but they have the videos. They had all of the footage of them preparing for this over years. So I don't know if I buy that. I don't know if I buy that.
I think having the footage and not acting on it is the evidence of the complacency. The argument I saw made was that they had helicopters stationed that could contain any breakout, and that's not a sound military argument, by the way. Basically, if you want to stop someone from going somewhere, you need to put troops in front of that thing. Because that's just how it works. Like they have I don't think they. Here's the thing. It's essential to Israel that this didn't happen. Their ability to defend themselves largely rests on the concept of not having to fight. So, like, if they had an inkling of the scope or scale of this, I think they would have intervened. But I don't think they were looking, or you have a 9/11 situation. Like, I don't believe this is an inside job. I think this is complacency and inefficiencies cropping up over the course of the consolidation that Likud has acted to build their power. Like, it's the kind of thing you see in burgeoning authoritarian situations, is the military and the state apparatus lose their effectiveness because they are more of a threat to the state than they are a help. The biggest threat to an authoritarian state is a competent military, their own competent military. It's to go back to Wagner and trying to storm Moscow. The only thing that really surprised me about that is they stopped. And that's the other thing I think to the point is I don't think Israel's really a true democracy, at least anymore, if it ever was one. It's essentially the cronyism that's present in Likud is widespread.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I'll be honest, it's kind of a dark picture of what happens if Trump gets elected in November.
Yeah.
Like for example, one of the things I learned is Likud, the transportation secretary, deliberately doesn't fix roads in cities where they don't expect to win votes. To try to enrage people against the local government. Like that's cronyism of the worst kind. But we are kind of running up against your imposed time limit. Do you have any final thoughts before we sign off for the night?
My final thoughts, I guess, are that, you know, this has been a horrible year. I'm hoping that, you know, that really what I care about, honestly, is that, you know, those who are the most vulnerable in these conflicts, you know, your civilians, your unarmed people, that some relief is given to them. That's my hope, you know, that they're able to get through this and that this horror that they're going through comes to an end. That's the only thing I can really say, because, you know, it's just so disgusting what's going on. It makes me it makes me sick, honestly.
I can't say I disagree. So I've been sitting on what to do for a long time, and I don't have a good answer yet because it's very difficult to weigh the outcomes here and like to figure out an effective road forward, because there does not seem to be
I don't think that they had a plan forward too.
I'm more talking from a perspective of me sitting here, seeing this and understanding the culpability. I don't see an effective route right now, and maybe that'll change in January if Harris wins. We clearly won't get any ground if Trump wins. But coming up with some kind of advocacy to try to change this policy might be worthwhile. It is something that should be investigated. It something it will be. But with that, I think I am going to bid everyone a good night. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you in particular, chat, for not creating problems, although you're usually pretty good. I was concerned that we were going to get some flack because we've gotten some pro-Israel hate speech, or pro-Israel supporters with hate speech in the past. So I appreciate everyone tonight.
Appreciate people keeping it civil.
With that, I want to wish you all good night. Subscribe if you haven't. Like the stream, click and subscribe, and have a good one.